Okay. Good morning for your presence in this third ComNet conference. Dear Mohammed Ben Amr is a representative of the Minister of Higher Education, Scientific Research and Communication Technologies. Dear Munir, Director of Subcom, Director of Studies, Mohammed Siela. Dear Professor Khalid Beltaif, who came from Hong Kong for this ComNet. Dear attendees, welcome to this third ComNet conference. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce this conference today, the third edition of ComNet, who has held the first one in 2009. We have about 70 papers. We have received about 70 submissions, and out of these, 40% have been selected. So about 30 papers will be presented these 3.5 days. We have had this selection process involved many of our colleagues, researchers. I'd like to thank them. Some of them are here with us these 3 days. We have a participant from Europe, from America, from Asia, and of course from Africa, from North Africa mainly. Four keynote speakers will be giving tutorials. The first will be given by Mr. Slim Alwini, who is here for this first keynote speak, just after this opening session. To close this brief introduction, I would like to say that next ComNet will be held in another country. We'll announce this on Saturday. Before leaving the floor to Khaled, I would like to tell you enjoy this seminar. The weather is nice, and I hope you will have a lot of good discussion with the authors of the papers. Thank you. The floor is yours, Khaled.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here on behalf of the IEEE as Vice President for IEEE Technical Activities. I really would like to congratulate the conference organizers for organizing this event. As you know, IEEE is the largest organization in our area. We have about 500,000 members from over 165 countries. I'm more working in the Communication Society, which is basically cover the topics that we have here in this particular conference. One of the nicest things about IEEE is it's an organization that is built on volunteers. And we welcome volunteers to be involved in managing basically the activities of the societies. And one of the key emphasis right now in IEEE is to bring a new blood, and especially young people, to join IEEE. So I really would like to urge you to get involved in IEEE. You don't have to be present in all conferences and all events, but a lot of things are happening online now, so you can be involved in so many things, whether in organizing conferences, we have organizing journals, being editors in journals or reviewers and so on and so forth. This is really something, a huge push now from IEEE to bring a new blood. And one of the areas that we are also trying to push is to get volunteers from outside North America, in particular in Africa, in India, in China, and Latin America. So please do your very best to be involved. So with that in mind, let me, I think we have a keynote speech by Slim. We're looking forward to hearing that. I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the chance to say something about IEEE. And let me congratulate you again on organizing this event. And if there is anything we can do from IEEE to help, I'll be more than happy to do so. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
So before giving the speech of Mr. Tawfiq Zlasi, the Minister of Higher Education, Scientific Research and ICT, we would like to thank the organizers for inviting our ministry for this very important event. It's always a pleasure to be here and to take part to the events organized by SIPCOM, like it was done on Sunday. So I will ask you kindly to give me the opportunity to read for you the message of His Excellency Mr. Tawfiq Zlasi, Minister of Higher Education, Scientific Research and ICT. It will be done in Arabic. السيدات والسادة ضيوف تونس الكرام، السيدات والسادة الأساتذة والباحثين والمدرسين والطلبة من مختلف المدارس والمختبرات والمؤسسات الجامعية ومؤسسات التعليم العالي، السيدات والسادة الحضور، يشرفني أن أكون بينكم اليوم لافتتاح أشغال المؤتمر الدولي الخامس حول الاتصالات والتشبيك كومنت 2014 الذي تنظمه المدرسة العليا للمواصلات، والذي يهدف إلى تجميع الباحثين من بلدان الشمال وبلدان الجنوب لتبادل الأفكار والتجارب لتدعيم علاقات الشراكة فيما بينهم حول مواضيع تتعلق بالاتصالات والشبكات. لا يخفي على أحد أن العالم يعيش اليوم تحولات عميقة وهامة أفرزت اقتصادا جديدا ونمط إنتاج جديد يتطور بسرعة مذهلة، ومن خصائصه اعتماده على المعرفة والخبرات والطرق السيارة للمعلومات والشبكات الاتصالية المتطورة. فقد شهدت معايير الشبكات الراديوية تطورا سريعا ومتعدد الاتجاهات منذ بداية العصر الخلوي في الثمانينات من القرن الماضي مع بدء النظم الخلوية التماثلية. ورغم التنوع الكبير في نظم الاتصالات القائمة، فإن تزويد المستعمل بخدمات ذات جودة عالية مع المحافظة على نفس الوقت على الربح أو الزيادة فيه ظل الدافع الرئيسي وراء كل تطور. إن التكنولوجيا لا تتوقف عند حد معين، والعالم يسير بسرعة البرق لتطويرها وابتكار حلول جديدة لكل مشاكل الحياة. ويبقى التطور في ميدان الاتصالات متسارع إلى درجة يصعب أحيانا الإنسان مجاراته، فما أن اعتاد البعض على خدمات جيل معين إلا وأن برز جيل يليه يفوق الذي سبقه من ناحية حجم البيانات المتداولة وسرعة تراسلها، علاوة على التطور الهائل الذي يشهده عدد التجهيزات المربوطة، حيث أن بعض المؤشرات تتوقع في أفق سنة 2019 بلوغ 50 مليار جهاز مرتبط بالشبكة، وهو ما يزيد في الضغط على خصائص شبكات الاتصالات ومدى تأقلمها مع التطورات الحاصلة على مستوى قدرة وعدد التجهيزات. إن التكنولوجيا ستطور بشكل قاطع طرق الاتصال بين المستعملين ونفاذهم إلى المعلومات وأسلوب عملهم وحتى أنشطتهم الاجتماعية، وذلك بفضل السرعة التي تتميز بها والتي ما فتئت تتطور من جيل إلى آخر. ومن هذا المنطلق لا يفوتني إلا أن أثني على المجهودات المبذولة لتطوير هذه التكنولوجيا والعمل على تنسيق جهود الحكومات ومؤسسات صناعة التكنولوجيا وكافة الأطراف المعنية بالقطاع من أجل تطوير نظم الاتصالات. هذا وبالتزامن مع المؤتمر العالمي للهاتف الجوال الذي انعقد في برشلونة في إسبانيا منذ أسبوعين، أعلن الاتحاد الأوروبي عن تخصيص مبلغ 50 مليون يورو في شكل منح جديدة لتسريع البحوث من أجل تطوير تكنولوجيا الهاتف النقال من الجيل الخامس بهدف أن يكون جاهزا بحلول عام 2020. علما وأن المفوضية الأوروبية سبق وأن خصصت أكثر من 700 مليون يورو من 2007 حتى 2013 للبحث في مجال شبكات المستقبل، نصفها ذهب إلى التقنيات اللاسلكية على وجه الخصوص. حضرات السيدات والسادة، أرجو أن يساهم هذا المؤتمر في توطيد علاقات الشراكة البحثية في جميع القضايا المتعلقة بالاتصالات والشبكات، وأن يسمح بمناقشة مختلف المواضيع المطروحة في المجال البحثي هذا، ونتطلع كذلك إلى أن يتم التطرق إلى القضايا الاستراتيجية المتعلقة بحسن توظيف واستعمال الموارد النادرة باعتبار الطلب والضغط المتزايد عليها. كما نرجو أن يساهم المنتدى أو المؤتمر في إعداد المشاركين حتى يقوموا بتأسيس عمل ناجح لتوظيف واستغلال الفرص التي تتيحها تكنولوجيا المعلومات والاتصال. كما نأمل في أن يكون هذا الحدث فرصة للباحثين والمصنعين وغيرهم من المتدخلين لتبادل المعارف والخبرات والآراء حول مستقبل هذه التكنولوجيا. وإجمالا أرجو أن يمثل الملتقى فرصة لبحث سبل التعاون والعمل المشترك. حضرات السيدات والسادة، لا يسعني في ختام كلمتي هذه إلا تجديد شكري وتقديري إلى منظمي هذا المؤتمر وكافة المشاركين في هذا الحدث المتميز على حضورهم المكثف، متمنيا لكم جميعا مزيدا من التوفيق والنجاح، والسلام عليكم.
Okay, thank you for your introduction and your keynote speaks. We have now the presentation of Slim. So I invite you to come and start your presentation.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sami, for the introduction. I would like also to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to share some of the ongoing research direction in my research group at KAUST. So the talk is about, I think I will use this mic just to be able to move around. Okay. So the talk is about spectrum scarcity and two potential solutions to solve this problem: cognitive radio and extreme bandwidth communication, more specifically free space optical communication. So first of all, I would like to say that I am at KAUST. KAUST stands for King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. It's a new university. Actually, it's not new anymore. We have been at KAUST now for about 5 years. It's a graduate level university delivering master and PhD degrees for students coming from all over the world. We are about a 1 hour drive north of the city of Jeddah, and we work in different areas of research related to energy, environment, water, and food, agriculture, as well as we have a center related to the Red Sea. Obviously, communication is an important part of research done at KAUST as an enabling technology to facilitate a lot of the research that is being done in the different research center and division at KAUST. Now, the agenda of the talk is going to be about spectrum scarcity, one of the main problems that we are facing these days. And I will start with that, and I will give reasons behind this spectrum crunch or spectrum exhaustion problem. And then I will give two potential solutions: cognitive radio, and I will give a tutorial presentation at the very high level about what do we mean by cognitive radio, and then I will present some of the recent results conducted in my research group within the framework of cognitive radio networks, and then I will move into another solution known as free space optical communication. Again, I will give probably a 10-15 minute tutorial about what is free space optical communication, what are the main issues when someone talks about free space optical communication. And then I will present some of the ongoing research direction conducted within my research group in this area. And then I will conclude the talk with a summary of the main kind of findings in this talk. So, spectrum scarcity. So when we talk about the radio spectrum, we refer to essentially the RF spectrum between 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. It is a national resource. It's scarce, and as such, it is regulated, optimized by the government. So you need a license typically to be able to access the spectrum. And radio spectrum is allocated into different bands, and these bands are basically used for different applications, such as radio and TV broadcasting, government and industry applications. You know, when we talk about government, we talk about military, police, safety, all of them will require part of the spectrum. And of course, over the recent years, commercial applications start, picking a big part of the spectrum. Initially, mainly for voice, but now more and more for not only voice, but also high data communications. So this is a standard chart that you see when you go to many of these conferences related to spectrum management. So essentially, this is just to illustrate that the US frequency allocation is essentially pretty much full, and there is not much spectrum to allocate for new applications. Actually, a study was done by the FCC, the US. The study was done in 2012. The study shows the growth in terms of traffic, wireless traffic, and basically the evolution of the traffic year after year, and with a prediction for 2013 and 14, because the study was done in 2012. And then correspondingly, you see how the spectrum is evolving. And what you notice is, the spectrum is still in surplus mode until 2012, but basically the expectation is by 2013 at that time, and by 2014, that essentially we are getting into a so-called spectrum deficit situation, where basically you do not have enough spectrum to handle the kind of mobile traffic that you would like to basically communicate, or you would like to deal with. So, this study was done also in connection with Cisco. There was some criticism for some of this data, but we are not looking here at absolute numbers. We are looking at trends, and definitely the trend is that essentially there is a growth in terms of wireless applications, and at the same time, there is the scarcity of the spectrum that is leading essentially to a situation where we need to find some other solution. So, and again, this RF spectrum crunch is mainly due to the usage of smartphones. It is expected that between 2011 and 2016 that the global wireless data traffic is going to increase by 18 times. And essentially all these factors are combining together to lead to the so-called spectrum crunch or spectrum exhaustion problem. And this deficit that was predicted by FCC in 2013, or maybe a few years later, if no really important decision or important solution are implemented. So what are the potential solutions? So you can categorize these solutions, I would say, in 3 categories. The first category is just to be more spectrally efficient. This has been an ongoing research direction by many of us. I'm sure many research in this conference are looking at MIMO system, basically the ability to multiplex data over multiple antennas or multiple data streams, and that's one way to use spatially, the spectrum more efficiently. There is also adapt modulation and coding, taking advantage of channel variation to send more data when the channel is in a good state, and kind of buffer the data when the channel is in a bad state. This, in average, also improve the overall spectral efficiency. Bottom line, the first category of problems, or the first category of solutions, they are solutions that are trying to improve the so-called beat per second per hertz. So we are trying to improve the spectral efficiency of the system. We are, in a way, reaching our limit. We are coming close to capacity. There is, as such, another set of, or another family of solutions that are basically listed here as the second category, that are trying to use more aggressively, temporally and spatially, the available spectrum. And by that, like you can think of cellular technology as being the first set of solution of this kind. By reusing the spectrum spatially, you are trying to be more spectrally efficient in space. And cognitive radio, as I will define it, or as I will introduce it later on, is basically one solution that fits within this framework, but also a femtocell or offloading solution where basically you place a highly dense network of femtocell that are going to capture traffic generated by hotspots and relieve the traffic that is otherwise going to macro cells, is in a way an approach to also use more aggressively spectrum locally. Now, in other words, the second family of solutions are solutions that are trying to improve the bit per second per hertz per meter square. You are trying to improve the area spectral efficiency of a system by reusing the spectrum spatially and also temporally when we talk about cognitive radio. Now, even the second family of solutions are in a way reaching maturity and or maybe they are practically difficult to implement. People sometimes criticize cognitive radio as not being very practical. But this leads us to look at another family of solution, and basically it's a very simple actually proposition. The proposition is try to just get into another part of the spectrum that is unused or has been lightly used for wireless communication. So when we talk about RF, we are limited to the well-known kind of frequencies that have been used for the past 20-25 years for commercial application. But the kind of proposition here is to look beyond the regular spectrum and try to look, for instance, at millimeter waves or 60 gigahertz to 90 gigahertz as a potential part of the spectrum that can carries a lot of the application of interest. People are talking even about terahertz waves. Terahertz has been advocated for imaging purposes, but there are small group within IEEE thinking of terahertz also for communication application. And then if you continue with the same kind of reasoning or with the same kind of argument, why not going to the optical spectrum? Although this is not new, actually this has been there for some time, as I will tell you down the road in this presentation, but it is for some at least still a new technology when it's considered for mass deployment of optical wireless communication. So, but I'll be talking about that at the end of my talk. So let us first look at one solution of this kind, a solution that basically look at this kind of family of solution, and then we'll be talking about free space optical, which falls rather within this family of solutions. So when you talk about cognitive radio, basically what you are trying to do, you are trying to develop solution for spectrum sharings, okay? It was kind of proposed for the first time in this PhD thesis in KTH by Mitola, 1999. He called that a really smart radio. And the full idea, or the idea behind cognitive radio is essentially to share the spectrum. And there are three modes of cognitive radio. There is a so-called interweave, or opportunistic cognitive radio. There is the underlay, where basically you communicate under a certain tolerable interference level. And then there is overlay, where essentially there is cooperation between primary and secondary networks. So before getting into the details behind these three different ways of cognitive radio, when we talk about cognitive radio, the first terminology that we have to set right is basically what we call primary network and secondary network. What we mean by that, there is the licensed users, the users who paid for the spectrum, and these are called primary network. They own the spectrum, and they have priority typically when communication is needed. And then you have what we call secondary network, or unlicensed users. These are users who will be allowed to communicate under a certain constraint or under a certain rule that are going to be dictated by the primary network. These are the users who did not pay for the spectrum directly to the government. They are just getting into a deal with the primary network to be able to communicate. So we have this notion of primary and secondary networks. Now, within this framework, we have this three mode of communication. So interweave or opportunistic spectrum access is the simplest way of cognitive radio, and the way you can think of it is basically the primary network owns the spectrum. As long as he transmits, no one else as a secondary network is allowed to transmit. But during the spectrum holes, which means during the fraction of time where the primary user does not need to transfer data, then the secondary network is allowed to communicate and share among themselves, the secondary network users, their data. So obviously, this is possible only if what we call spectrum sensing is possible. So spectrum sensing is the mechanism used by the secondary network to sense the activity of the primary network, to make sure that the primary network is active or not. Now, if it's active, obviously, he's going to not communicate. If basically the primary user is not active and a spectrum hole is detected opportunistically, and that's why we call that opportunistic spectrum access, the secondary user is going to be allowed to communicate. Now, the problem is typically modeled as a binary hypothesis detection problem, where from a secondary perspective, what you are trying, or let's say from a primary perspective, from a primary network perspective, the main point is to try to satisfy the probability of detection from a spectrum sensing perspective, which means that the secondary network has to track the activity of the primary network quite accurately. We do not want a secondary network to start communicating and interfering with the primary network, which means the detection probability of the spectrum sensing mechanism has to be quite high. Now, correspondingly, you need also to have in a way, from a secondary performance perspective, a minimum probability of false alarm. What does it mean, a false alarm? A false alarm means that you think that the primary user is active while he is not. The problem with that is that if the false alarm is very high, it means that you have a lot of lost opportunities for the secondary network. The secondary network will be thinking that the primary user is active while he is not active, which means he will not be transmitting while actually he should be transmitting because the spectrum is available. So this is usually the trade-off. You would like to come up with efficient spectrum sensing techniques that have a high probability of detection while maintaining a minimum as possible probability of false alarm. And this is led to many researchers, mostly from the signal processing and communication kind of communities, communication theory, communication system communities, working on different sensing techniques, starting from the simplest and most popular energy detector to more sophisticated cyclostationary match filter eigenvalue ratio approach to come up with sophisticated sensing techniques. Also, as Mohammed bin Kahla mentioned yesterday in his tutorial as part of the spring school, often you may end up having the so-called hidden problem or hidden node problem. Like you have one particular secondary node or secondary user who is in a spot that does not allow him to sense the spectrum in a very accurate fashion. He's in what we call in a hidden node kind of situation. And as such, the best way actually to accurately sense the spectrum is to rely on the cooperation between the secondary users. Khaled had like a very popular paper in this topic of cooperative sensing, where basically multiple secondary users collaborate together to get an as accurate as possible sense of the activity of the primary network. So that's the first category of problems. The second category of cognitive radio system. The second category is an overlay system where basically there is more of a cooperation between the primary and secondary network. For instance, the secondary network can act as relay for the primary network in exchange of the user of the spectrum. So here, most of the research was done within overlay spectrum sharing or overlay cognitive radio system, fall in the area of cooperative communications or cognitive cooperative communication and distributed space-time coding. The last set of cognitive radio system fall in this category of so-called underlay cognitive radio system. And in this framework, what happens is the secondary network is allowed to transmit regardless of the activity of the primary network, but as long as the interference created or generated by the secondary network is below an acceptable threshold. So typically, the problem is modeled as a Z channel or sometimes as an X channel, and basically you have a primary network, and here kind of just as a kind of toy example, we have one single primary user having a primary or single primary transmitter, single primary receiver. That's the channel between the primary transmitter and primary receiver. You have a secondary transceiver with a secondary transmitter on this side, secondary receiver on this side. These HPP and HS denote the channel coefficients between the primary users, and here is between the secondary user, and that's the cross interference link between the between secondary transmitter and primary receiver. So the idea here is to allow this link to be active as long as the interference generated from here to here is below a certain threshold. Now, you have all kind of problems have been set up within this framework, and that's where I will dig a little bit more in the following slides. So for instance, the kind of problem you'll be looking at, you kind of, for instance, look at optimization problem where you have a certain power budget here, and you are trying to maximize the capacity of these links under a power limitation here and interference limitation here. Or we are trying to minimize the power consumed here under a certain transmit power constraint here and interference reception here. So that's basically exactly the same kind of block diagram, and a lot of the research that has been done within this area is about the availability of CSI. Where CSI is available, and by CSI is channel state information. Where channel state information is available, and how accurate is the channel state information. So, on the top of that, also there is also what kind of constraint do you have? Do you have peak constraint or do you have average constraint? So you have multiple kind of combinations, and one of the research topics that we focused on over the recent, I would say, years in my group is essentially this notion of CSI as well as a combination of different power constraints. And when I say CSI, do we have perfect CSI? Do we have imperfect CSI? Do you have just average CSI, which means you have only statistical information. You have information about the, for example, distribution of the channel and the average SNR of the channel, but you don't have instantaneous realization of the channel or an imperfect channel, basically estimate at the transmitter or even at the receiver. So typically, the kind of problem you'll be looking at is you are trying, for instance, here to maximize the channel capacity over HS and HP. HS and HP basically are, basically you assume that you have a certain knowledge, either instantaneous or imperfect or statistical of HS and HP, and you are trying to maximize this capacity under what? Under an average power constraint. In this particular case, we pick that as an example, and that's the power as function of HS and HP, so it's under a certain average power constraint. And in this particular case, we picked an interference constraint or an instantaneous interference constraint or a peak interference constraint here. So what we are trying to show here is a problem we're trying to maximize this capacity as function of the power allocated here, that is depends on HS and HP, and what you have an average power constraint here, and you have a peak interference constraint. But you can look at all kind of other combinations in terms of channel state information availability and peak and average power constraints. And then you can solve this problem, and that was our main contribution in this paper that appeared in Transaction Wireless Communication about a year ago. And the whole point here was to basically, the key question we tried to kind of answer is how important is CSI? And then more importantly, how significant is the level of accuracy in the CSI. So here what we are plotting is the secondary user capacity as function of the amount of power in average that you put to the channel in two regimes. In the so-called high SNR regime, let's say from 0 to 20 dB, and then we zoom in this part and we look also at the low SNR regime. Now, what we are plotting here is this capacity for different level of availability of CSI. So the no CSI case, which is only channel state information knowledge in average, is giving you as a benchmark here this lower curve here. Okay, so sorry, this, okay, so this lower curve here is essentially when you have no CSI at all. I mean, when I say no CSI, no instantaneous CSI, you have only average CSI. Now, that's one benchmark. The other benchmark is the upper curve, where you have perfect CSI everywhere. That's obviously the best you can do, and that will give you, of course, the other benchmark, or the upper curve, where you have the best possible capacity. Now, everywhere in between is basically different level of accuracy in your channel state information. So for instance, you can think of a situation where you have a certain imperfection here and a certain imperfection here. And now this is quantified through parameter alpha between 0 and 1. If alpha is close to 1, you have a perfect channel estimation. If alpha is close to 0, you have a rather statistical information, or basically nearly no instantaneous channel information. Now, what is the lesson that we learn from these two curves? You know, without getting into numbers exactly, you can look at, for example, the red curve here. Okay? The red curve here is an alpha S of 0.8, which is secondary link is of a good quality, whereas the primary link of a bad quality. And what you notice here is what is red here, and it's the same parameter here for red here, are reversed. Here, the red is very close, or at least is the second best channel capacity, whereas at low SNR, red is actually the worst among all possible imperfect channel estimation. There is a crossing that happens basically here. What does it mean? It means that basically, when you are operating at low SNR, what is really important is that you know, more importantly, the quality of basically this link. So let's assume that you cannot measure these two channels perfectly, simultaneously. Of course, if you can measure these two channels perfectly simultaneously, that's the best, and that's the optimal solution that you can get in terms of capacity. But let's assume we are not able to estimate these channels perfectly. And you have to dedicate a lot of resource to estimate channel accurately. The lesson that we learn from this optimization exercise is that basically, when you are operating at low SNR, basically at low power, the interference that you are generating is not that harmful. What you need to do, you need to estimate very well this channel to optimize your power with respect to your secondary link without worrying much about the interference you'll be generating here, because anyway it's minimal because you are operating at low power regime. On the other hand, if you operate at high power regime, you need to spend quite a bit of resources to basically know as well as possible HP, because you'll be generating quite a bit of interference and you need to back off and basically make sure that you not interfere that much with the secondary network. So the lesson learned is at high SNR, you need to know, or you need to spend a lot of resources estimating HP, whereas at low SNR, the reverse is true. You need to spend more resource on HS. And that's what this curve is showing. That's what the red curve is showing here. It means that you need to know better in the high SNR, basically the cross-link. HS has to be 0.8, very close to 1. Whereas when HS is equal to 0.8 in the low SNR, that's not good. Actually, it's better to have HP equal 0.8, and that's why the green curve that was low here became high here. That's the lesson learned from this paper. Now, the other kind of research that we have done in this area is essentially the so-called low SNR regime. This is an area that has been quite popular over the recent years, especially in the information theory track of communication. And when we talk about low SNR in a cognitive setup, we talk about a situation where basically you are in an unfavorable situation where you are dealing either with low power here. It can be, for instance, a sensor cognitive radio network, or it can be a situation where basically the cross-link in average is very strong, whereas your basically secondary link is weak. So in other words, you are in a situation where basically you'll be generating a lot of interference, so you have to minimize your power, or you have to basically work in a very low power regime. And the idea here is it possible to get some, I would say, characterization of the capacity accurately. Now, actually, these formulas often are not in closed form. They involve a couple of integrals at least, if not more, especially if you account for channel imperfection. But luckily enough, in the low SNR regime, one can derive a very simple closed form expression for the capacity of underlay cognitive radio network. So this is an example where we're able to derive basically capacity results at low SNR for fading that is Nakagami for both primary and secondary users. And actually, if you further simplify these results, accounting for the simplest kind of fading available, like Rayleigh fading, the capacity result is amazingly simple. It just tells you that it scales as I peak, which is the interference temperature, multiplied by the ratio of the average SNRs. You cannot get as simple as that as a formula, and this formula is quite accurate, as demonstrated here in this figure, where in blue you have exact result computed after numerical integrations, and then you have in red the asymptotic results that are quite accurate for anything below minus 5 dB or so. Okay, so this is always interesting, to be able to characterize capacity or bit rate results in closed form. And if you cannot do it exactly, you can go sometime for asymptotic results, because that gives you insight on how the capacity scales or how the bit rate scales as function of SNR. And this paper was presented in the last ICC. Now, that was an example of one category of solution, cognitive radio, and I'm sure in this conference, and I know in Subcom, for instance, here a lot of people are working in the area of cognitive radio networks, but this has been an area of great interest over the last 10 years or so. Another area that is picking up is optical wireless communication. And within optical wireless communication, you have different kind of systems. You have what people call visible light communication, mostly for indoor communications, but there is also for outdoor so-called free space optical communication. So I will start with a brief tutorial on free space optical communication for those of you who are not familiar with this technology. Basically, the principle is quite simple. What we are trying to do, we are trying to connect using narrow beam two optical transceivers. The source is typically a laser. Sometimes, if you are not looking for a very long range, you can even use a more efficient LED. And basically, what you are trying to set up is a fiber optic over the air, if you will. You can have full duplex capability because you can have two different wavelengths, one wavelength for the, let's say, for the uplink and one wavelength for the downlink, and there's plenty of bandwidth available to share. There are three optical windows that have been identified: 850 nanometer, 1300 nanometer, and 1550 nanometer. Interestingly enough, these windows match perfectly also the windows that have been used traditionally for fiber optic communication. Now, I highlighted in blue the 1550 nanometer because for eye safety reasons, this is the most desired wavelength. As you may know, light or the eye is quite sensitive to light or to optical waves below 1400 nanometers, okay? It can affect directly the retina. On the other hand, the wavelength above 1400 nanometers can be essentially absorbed by the cornea, and as such, the 1550 nanometer, which is above 1400 nanometer, is very interesting from a eye safety perspective. Now, I will tell you a little bit about the research issues and the challenges that are facing free space optical communication, but just to show you the potential of this technology, I'm citing here two results that have been reported in the literature very recently, although, and I apologize, I don't have the exact references, but they are papers that have been published, mainly from people coming from an optics engineering background or from a fiber optic communication background that got into free space optical communication. And the two records that are on paper now are basically a group of Japanese, a couple of years ago, were able to shoot 10 gigabit per second over 1 kilometer. And they do that by multiplexing basically over 4 wavelengths, 2.5 gigabits. More recently, a group in Pisa in Italy was able to demonstrate 1.28 terabit per second by multiplexing basically 40 gigabit per second over 32 carriers. These are huge amount of data that can be transferred over relatively interesting distances, and that's why there is really an interest in this technology. Now, let's dig more and see why FSO, or where is it used. So first of all, it's license-free. In other words, it's unlicensed. Until, at least so far, you are not required to pay taxes, to pay basically tariff to utilize the optical spectrum. It's cost-effective, and this goes very well with the notion of a brownfield. You have a city or let's say a small village that is not connected through fiber optics, and basically you would like to set up quickly a high-speed network. Instead of trying to dig and put fiber optics right and left, you can create your basically high-speed network in the air by creating a set of free space optical transceivers. So it's fast in terms of putting together the system and deploying it and removing it. It's just a set of transceivers. You don't have a fiber or a channel or cables to lay out. It's very high bandwidth available, similar to fiber. It is also very energy efficient because the narrow beam that you capitalize on, it's immune to interference. It's not a broadcast mode like an RF where you create interference. It's basically narrow beam and directional kind of transmissions, and as such also it provides high level of security. All of these things make FSO more and more attractive. And for instance, you can see the different application where people are starting basically looking at free space optical. Now, having said that, this is not really a new technology. It has been there, or it has been advocated for since the laser was invented in the 60s. But because of the advantage of immunity to interference, immunity to security, and basically hard to intercept, it was was essentially limited to secure military application in its early kind of generation. But also because one of the main kind of obstacle or challenge of optical wireless communication, as I will talk about later on, is propagation through atmosphere and atmosphere effects. It has been used actually for the outer atmosphere communication, which means inter-satellite communication over thousands of kilometers can be done very reliably by having two lasers, laser and photodetector, communicate to each other. So initially it was used for military and space application. More recently, FSO is being advocated for the so-called last mile problem, or as a last mile solution. So you have a building that is connected to the internet backbone through fiber optics, so high-speed connectivity in this building. All the houses or building around this building do not have that capability. Instead of digging and putting fiber optics right and left, you just set up basically your network of FSO on the air, and you can basically offer the same high-speed capabilities as a last-mile solution to these buildings. Basically, they will benefit from the backbone internet connectivity available in this building. Now, it can be also an optical fiber backup solution. You may have fiber optics, but it can go down for a variety of reasons, and the FSO network can pick up that as a backup solution. It can give you high data rate for temporary events, World Cup, big conference, Olympic Games, a 2-week, 3-week event where you need a huge capacity over a short period of time, instead of like putting together an infrastructure for a long period of time to basically just 2 or 3 weeks. You can just set up your FSO network on the air and then dismantle it at the end of this event and achieve the capacity or provide the capacity you need over a short period of time. Another interesting, I think, topic, it can be also for disaster operation when your network shut down and you can set up again quickly your network and start operating at high speed, is another important topic that came, and if those of you who were in the last ICC, there was a big interest in the so-called cellular communication backhaul. With the emergence of all these femtocell solutions, you need also to connect these femtocells, and again, instead of digging and putting fibers, it is more interesting to create a wireless backhaul. And the wireless backhaul comes with a strict condition on the bit rate and data rate that this wireless backhaul has to basically provide. And people are advocating for basically millimeter wave as a good solution for the wireless backhaul. I think, and the people working in the optical communication area feel that FSO can be also a very good solution, or actually a hybrid FSO millimeter wave can be probably an ideal solution for basically the wireless backhaul problem. Now, of course, with all the kind of result I showed earlier and the potential and opportunities that I showed, there is still challenges, important challenges that are facing FSO and that are summarized in this slide. What are the challenges? First of all, of course, like any communication system, an FSO system is going to be subject to background radiation from the sun, for instance, or additive noise. And as such, and here what I'm presenting is in red all the problems, in green are potential solutions. So the potential solution, you can have more sensitive detectors. People are using now more avalanche diodes as a photodetector, which tend to be more sensitive to PIN detector or PIN diodes. You need to use narrow filters to remove noise. And people are advocating more and more, although people in the optical communication engineering community are more used to incoherent basically IMDD, which stands for intensity modulation direct detection. More recently, people are more comfortable also going with basically a coherent type of heterodyne detection, which gives you a higher signal-to-noise ratio. Now, of course, free space is quite high in this optical range, and as such, you need to deal with a limited range, and you can maybe use sometime multi-hop communication kind of solutions. Now, the other problem that comes with, or that the FSO is facing, is all problems that come with atmosphere. And you can categorize these problems in two families. The first family of problems are basically weather-based problems, which are essentially any kind of weather or climatic changes can affect considerably an FSO link, starting from snow, rain, fog, smog, low cloud. All of these things can make you lose actually completely the link. Like fog is the biggest enemy of FSO. You can reach up to 200 dB per kilometer losses if you have a thick fog in your way. Rain and snow can affect the performance, but not as much. Now, what are the solutions to basically mitigate the effect of atmospheric loss, which are long-term? When you have fog, you can have it for a few hours. We are not talking about like a fraction of a second or like basically a short period of time. We are talking about a long period of time where you can completely lose connectivity. Obviously, power control, where you can adapt your power with respect to the channel condition, but obviously there is a limit to the amount of power you can put into the channel. Mesh architecture, basically FSO is not only about point-to-point, you can create a whole FSO networks and you can create different routes to reach a certain destination, and as such, using route diversity to reach a particular destination point can be an alternative solution. And I think the most practical solution, and that's actually what is deployed in practice, and that's what you see when you go and try to shop for an FSO kind of product, is a so-called hybrid RF FSO, which means you don't sell only an FSO system, you sell an FSO system, and along with it will come a millimeter wave RF link that is also high data rate, but not as high as an FSO. Typically, you have a hybrid RF FSO system that's going to be operating FSO-wise 2.5 gigabit per second, and then when the FSO is not available for whatever reason, the RF link is going to pick up, and you will have few hundred megabit per second as a backup link. So maybe 99% of the time you are dealing at, or you are communicating at extremely high data rate, and then 1% of the time you'll have to live with this low data rate. So hybrid RF FSO is a quite interesting solution that has been advocated for, and that you see deployed in many of the systems to combat the effect of atmospheric losses. But on the top of the atmospheric losses, you have similar kind of fading, it's called usually scintillation in the FSO community, that you see basically due to atmospheric turbulence. These are just change of temperature within the pocket of air in the atmosphere, and just to mitigate this effect, you need like the kind of techniques that we have used quite extensively in the RF world, diversity in all kind of form and colors. You can use temporal diversity, you can use space diversity, you can use frequency diversity to combat the effect of atmospheric turbulence. Now, one specific problem to FSO also is this problem of pointing error. Basically, you need to have perfect alignment or nearly perfect alignment between transmitter and receiver, because you are dealing with a narrow beam, and if basically you lose alignment, you are dealing with a pointing error, and you can have a strong degradation in your performance. This alignment or misalignment, it can be due to building swaying, motion, vibration, and as such, to be able to kind of compensate for this misalignment, you need to have a tracking system. It's similar to what is used, for example, in missile-guided systems, where basically you need to guide perfectly transmitter and receiver to keep perfect alignment and to keep the SNR high. Now, this is not science fiction. Sometimes when I go and talk about these FSO links, people think, oh, but they are not reliable, they don't work, you know, you don't have the reliability that you want. But actually, it is not maybe early system were of this kind. People improve the technology. We tried to build a test bed at KAUST, and we went ahead and shopped for a few of the companies that are selling these kind of products. As you see, you have typically a hybrid RF FSO solution with a 2.5 gigabit, for instance, in the first product here as a main link, and a backup link of 150 megabit per second in a millimeter wave range. And basically with a 20K, you can have an up and running system with a range of up to 1 kilometer or even more. Okay, so it is not science fiction anymore. It is a real product that you can go and buy. Actually, just to make my case even stronger, and I'm taking advantage of the presence of Khaled to basically also tell him, because I know some people are skeptical about this technology. I would like to show you like basically a small movie that was broadcasted about, so we have to make sure, we have a problem with the sound here. So can someone help me, because it was working? So just to introduce this small movie, is like a 2-minute clip that was actually broadcasted about 2 weeks ago in CNN. And as you will see, it's going to talk pretty much our language. It's going to tell us a little bit how FSO is used in a very kind of subtle application. I have never thought that basically FSO can be used for this application, but it's about trading. You know, when you do trading in the stock market, you have to be extremely fast. A second matters, and you need to buy or sell a stock extremely fast. So this company, and I will let let the guy talk about his company. He's basically developed an FSO-based solution to beat the regular wireline network and to be able to trade or to make trade extremely fast. So I hope the voice is going to help me. So
Happens. One company has devised a new way to make the trades even faster.
It's a laser that's infrared. It can go up to 15 kilometers, and it's the same one that's actually used in your remote control.
The laser takes about half the time as sending the same transaction through a traditional fiber optic cable. Based on the same technology fighter jets use to communicate, Enova partnered with another communication company, Aoptics, to create ground-based towers with lasers at the top. The lasers have a line of sight from one to another, enabling them to send data back and forth. Though there are limits, large distances are still an issue.
The maximum distance today is about 10 kilometers. Between the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, that's about a 50-kilometer run. And so what that equates to then is 2 endpoints, 3 midpoints, for a total of 5 hops. You have to avoid blockages, trees, large topographical obstructions.
It's not just obstructions the lasers have to deal with. They also have heaters to keep snow and ice off the lens, the ability to stay aligned if the building sways on a windy day, and even visors to protect them from bird droppings. There's also a radio frequency antenna, commonly known as RF, that broadcasts the data at the same time as the laser.
And lasers don't like fog. That's okay, because then it runs on the RF side of things. RF doesn't like rain, but that's okay. The laser doesn't mind rain. So what that gives to the users is 99.9% availability, or equivalent to fiber through the air.
Despite the distance and need for many repeaters to keep the signal going, Enova is already developing a path between New York and Chicago with ambitious plans to connect other financial centers around the world.
We want to democratize access. We want to build this once, and then that's it. And then everyone participates in it.
Matt Stewart, CNN Money, New York.
okay, so I want to show basically this small documentary from CNN just to tell you that basically FSO is picking up in markets that are, I never thought that basically FSO can beat the wireline network. And what is more even strange to me is this statement at the end of the talk. Of course, if you are within New York, okay, you can argue it's okay, like a couple of hops or like, and you see, they are using our terminology, multi-hop communication. They are talking about hybrid RF FSO. They are talking about pointing errors in this high-level documentary. So going back to my remark, I mean, a 3-hop system is something that one can imagine, and I don't think it's a big issue. But a multi-hop system between New York and Chicago, to me, it's really an interesting endeavor, and I'm really curious to see if really they will go ahead and deploy an FSO link between New York and Chicago. But just to tell you that there are some niche applications where FSO is gaining some ground, and where basically it's showing that it can do quite well and can compete with RF technology in a very efficient way. Now, this is the tutorial part of the talk. I have, I think, 10 more minutes. What I would like to highlight, what are the interesting research directions that are being done? Actually, my student Hessa, she's in the audience, will have a paper on one of the kind of new topics of research is channel modeling, and basically picking up the general channel models to basically assess performance, and she will have a technical talk during the conference. But what I would like to talk about here, maybe one recent result in this area, where basically we are trying to unify, from a performance analysis perspective, some of the results that have been published in this area. So when we unify, we look at FSO, there are a lot of people, actually, and good people that have been looking at this area over the last recent years, but the results are scattered. So there are people who work on certain kind of detection, some other people look at pointing error, but not kind of general fading situations, all kind of scattered results. So what we would like to unify, or at least one of the results I would like to show, is a unified performance metric of systems that are using different kind of detection techniques. So for instance, we have the non-coherent and the coherent kind of detection techniques. And the fact is that the SNR depends on the irradiance square in the first case, whereas the SNR depends only on the irradiance on the second part, make the calculation different, but actually there is an opportunity to unify, as you can see later on. There is another aspect that we would like to take into account, which is something that we don't see in RF system, is the pointing error, as I mentioned. There is a model that has been developed in Canada, in McMaster by Haranovich and his group, and basically this model accounts for the pointing error. It's parameterized by this parameter Xi. Xi can be viewed as the ratio between the beam radius and the pointing error jitter. So this is a beam radius, that's the jitter of error. If the ratio is big, which means that basically the jitter error is within the beam radius, you are having no pointing error. On the other hand, as basically this ratio goes smaller and smaller, basically the jitter is exceeding the beam radius and you are getting into a serious pointing error. So that's something that I would like to factor in your calculation. And of course, you would like to account for the different kind of fading models, and essentially, just to make a long story short, in this context of FSO, what you are dealing with is a simple, flat, non-time selective fading channels. You can have weak turbulence regime or strong turbulence regime, depending on the so-called Rayleigh number, which depends on the temperature in the air. And basically, the weak turbulence are mainly mod by log normal, the strong turbulence by an exponential distribution, but the most common and general model is a gamma-gamma, although, as I mentioned, there are even further generalization of that, and there'll be one talk on that in this conference. So, our first result in this area was to try to unify these different kind of topics or different kind of performance metrics, performance issues in a single formula. So what I'm presenting here is a unified PDF of the SNR at the output of a receiver, accounting for, in different colors, the average SNR. Alpha and beta are fading parameters that are function of basically atmospheric conditions. Xi is basically the pointing error parameter that accounts for basically how good is your pointing in your system. R is the type of detection, takes two numbers, 1 or 2, depending on using coherent or non-coherent detection. So, and it's in terms of a Meiji function, it's a unified formula. It basically reduced to a well-known formula produced by different researchers in the past, basically the interesting thing about this formula, it is in terms of G function, which is quite complicated, but the G function can have interesting asymptotic result, and as such, you can have simple closed form results, for asymptotically, or exact results, again, in terms of G function, when we are looking, for example, for ergodic capacity. So, for instance, here, I'm showing the capacity of an FSO link subject to gamma-gamma fading with pointing error, and for basically two kind of detection schemes depending on the value of R. And you can develop an asymptotic result for this capacity when you go to high SNR in terms of simple function. And actually we have another approach actually to also to compute asymptotes in a very simple way. And what you end up having here is basically at high SNR, capacity scaling as log SNR plus a factor that depends only on the detection parameter, on the channel condition alpha and beta, and on the pointing error. Very simple asymptotic results that basically do not require a lot of sophisticated computation of G function and so on. So to see the accuracy of these results, what you have here is a capacity result for two pointing error and the strong turbulence condition. So this is how we pick our alpha and beta. And what you notice, obviously, this is a strong value of Xi, which means there is no pointing error. It's like a very high value of Xi. When the Xi goes close to 0, like it's 1.2, you have strong pointing error, and as such, the capacity decreases from the magenta level here to the green level here. So the magenta and green curves are computed exactly using Meiji functions. Now, if you want to use a not complicated special function, you can use the asymptotic results that we developed. And the asymptote, just using the dominant term or single term, are basically these lines, and as you notice, they are quite accurate. Beyond 25 dB, you get the right slope and you have the right value of the capacity. These results are valid for weak turbulence conditions. They are valid also for low SNR. So basically, we have a unified framework that capture the type of detection, generalized fading environment, pointing error in a single exact closed form formula in terms of G function with an asymptotic expansion that is in very simple elementary functions. Now, what I would like to conclude with, just that I remain within my allocated time, so you can do the same kind of things when you look at beta rate, but I would like just to kind of illustrate one potential application of FSO within femtocell or within the cellular network. One can think of basically some hotspots where you have a lot of traffic, and within this hotspot you can deploy a femtocell. This femtocell can act as a relay, basically by taking or gathering multiple RF links, because FSO is not very good with mobility, but basically if you are dealing with highly mobile RF users, you can capture them within a femtocell, but then basically to be able to communicate with the backbone, you can basically multiplex all these RF links and basically put them on a fat FSO pipeline, and what you end up having at the end is a basically hybrid mixed RF FSO or cascade RF FSO 2-hop transmission system, where the first hop is going to be RF and the second hop is going to be FSO. And this, for those of you familiar with cooperative communication, is a classical problem where essentially you need to evaluate the end-to-end SNR performance, the capacity, the arch probability. But the kind of interesting part of the twist to the problem is that we are combining an RF link to an FSO link, which make the calculation slightly different. But nonetheless, we were able to compute that in closed form. So I will skip the math. I can, you have the reference here, and I shared the presentation with the organizer. So maybe it will be made available on the website. So basically, you can evaluate everything in closed form. You can even add some hybrid RF links as a diversity link, and still compute things in closed form. So let me conclude my talk here by saying that basically spectrum scarcity is becoming a reality. We really have to find solutions to this problem. There are multiple set of solutions. There is cognitive radio as one potential solution where basically you use more aggressively the spectrum. But there is another natural solution, is to go to the unused part of the spectrum by using extreme bandwidth communication, 60 millimeter wave communication, or 60 gigahertz communication, millimeter wave communication, or even free space optical communication. Now, in my group, our kind of specialty or expertise is in the area of performance analysis. What we are trying to do is analyze the performance of these systems and basically come up with design trade-offs for basically engineers who will be responsible for deploying these kind of systems. And as far as other ongoing research direction within our group at KAUST is basically not only continuing on the performance analysis part, but trying to basically build a test bed to try to characterize the FSO link in our part of the world, where basically you are dealing with sandstorm, high level of humidity, and try to check how reliable are these links in these kind of conditions. So before concluding, I would like to thank different collaborators, students, and people who work on different topics related to FSO and cognitive radio in my previous institution, Texas A&M at Qatar, and in KAUST now in Saudi Arabia. And with that, I would like to thank you, and I would be happy to take a few questions. Any questions? Okay, thank you. So I guess now we have, I'm not sure who, we have a small break and then we go to the different session, right? Okay. Thank you.